Um, Hello, please, good evening. I think that let's please allow 4 minutes for others to also join in. Okay. So that we start. So we'll be starting exactly at 8:10, please. Um, okay. Good evening once again. I believe at this point we can begin. Okay, so tonight we are looking at economics, specifically section one, and the goal is to be able to tackle two sessions tonight. And I'm hoping to be able to complete section one and section five, which I believe are the most fundamental sections in the entire economics. There are some sections that you are going to treat them in the week two examination because I would say that they involve a lot of formulas and are very, very crucial to the examination. Hence, it would be best that we approach um, the examination with a fresh knowledge of those concepts. Okay, so I would start at this point. Okay, so economics 102, I believe last semester I looked at introduction to economics 1, which is economics 101. And under that, we basically looked or explored microeconomics. And we basically have two basic concepts which we have to understand. And economics, let me say two major divisions, okay. We have the micro and we have the macros, okay. So basically, we know what the difference between these two words is. They are just English, which were derived originally from Latin, okay. Micro and macro. So micro basically means small, okay, a small unit of something. And macro just means to approach something from um, I mean the broader picture or the broader perspective to something. So microeconomics basically looks at the smaller unit of an economy. Okay, so we are basically talking about the individual participants of an economy, and we are looking to study them, and that is what microeconomics capture. But under macroeconomics, we are not looking at the individual forces of an economy. We are looking to aggregate all those forces and study them as a whole. Okay, so we are looking to combine all individual units of an economy and study them in terms of the broader context or the broader concepts. And that is what we refer to as macro economics. Okay, so micro basically deals with individuals. Okay, so we talk about individuals. So if you remember last semester, we did something that was demand and supply. We did things like utility theory. We did all those things. Okay, production theory, cost theory, all those kind of things. And under them, we basically looked at individuals, firms, and governments as individual units or individual contributors to an economy. But under macroeconomics, we are not just looking at those individuals, but we are looking at the performance of an economy as a whole. Okay, so we are talking about nations, we are talking about the larger scale or the larger sense of an economy, and that is what we refer to as macroeconomics. I think, sorry, I forgot to ask whether I can be heard. Please, if I can be heard, can I get a thumbs up or an indication to indicate that? Yeah, then why? All right, so we can continue. Okay, so that is the main difference between microeconomics and macroeconomics. And this a question that is very examinable. You can be asked to differentiate between microeconomics and macro economics. Okay. So under this section, this is what we are going to look at. We are going to look at what macroeconomics is. Please let us take note that under economics 102, that is introduction to economics 2, every concept and everything that we are going to study is about macroeconomics. It's about nations. It's about the economy as a whole. So you should make sure that any concept that you explain, especially for the sake of examination, you do not approach it from the micro perspective. Okay, that is individuals, that is firms, that is the government, as in the individual units. You should try to look at how try to approach it from, the aggregated sense, as in from a much from the broader scale, as in how it affects the nation, as in from the broader perspective. And when we are looking at the topics, we'll do our best to make sure that we distinguish between these two concepts, or how to explain or how to approach things from a macro perspective. Else, you might think that you've done the right thing, all right, but to the one who is going to mark, I believe they are professionals and they are just very good in spotting those kind of things, and that could be a legitimate reason why you could lose marks in the examination or in those kind of stuff. So we are going to look at basic issues in macroeconomics, which is a GDP. In fact, these are not just basic issues; these are major key points, or major key topics in macroeconomics. Apart from GDP, we look at inflation, we also look at unemployment, and we are going to also look at the goals of macroeconomics policy. Okay, so what this literally means is that section 1 is a summary of the entire macroeconomics, or the entire introduction to economics 2. Section 1 gives us a picture of what we are going to do in the subsequent sections, which I believe we have 9 sections. So in the other 8 sections, so having a broader understanding of section 1 grants you or gives you the foundation to be able to understand the subsequent sections. And please, in case you don't understand anything, you can raise your hand and then we'll take that again. Okay, so let's go straight away into things. So let us look at what a macroeconomics is. So as stated earlier, macroeconomics is basically the study of the behavior of this micro, okay, that's what we did previously. It's a study of the behavior of individual, small, isolated, and disaggregated units, okay. So when it comes to microeconomics, we are looking to study firms. Firms is an individual producing unit, or an individual production unit, or an individual unit of production. What we mean by an individual unit of production is that, look, if you go to an industrial area, okay, that is an area which produces similar commodities. Okay, let me give a practical example of an industry, and from that I'm going to explain a firm. Okay, then I differentiate between the two. So let's take this box as an industrial area. So let's call this, let's say, industrial area A, or industrial unit A. Okay, and when you go to industrial unit A, you can find different companies in there. Let's call the first company, let's call it Benz. Okay, so you have Benz there, where they deal in producing Benz cars. So you have another company there, let's call this Toyota. Okay, so this also produces Toyota vehicles. And then you have, let's say, a third company which produces car tires. Okay, so this produces car tires, and that's a third company there. Another company produces, let's say, sprays, okay, that are used to spray car bodies. So let's call it a spray manufacturing company. And another company produces, let's say, car seats, okay. So these are 5 different companies that are located in a particular industrial area called Industrial Area A, okay. Now, what is common about these 5 companies? They produce closely related goods, okay, or the goods that they produce have a relation with one another. How are they related? The company that produces car tires is situated there basically because Benz and Toyota are situated in that same industrial area, and they are there to supply them with tires to produce their vehicles. We have another company that produces sprays, okay? So they also supply Benz and Toyota with those sprays. Another company produces car seats, and they supply Benz and Toyota with car seats, okay? And Benz and Toyota produces typically the same goods, which is cars or vehicles, okay? So you can call this an industrial area because they all produce closely related goods, okay? The goods that they produce could be substitutes of either each other, or they could be complements of each other. That is, they could be jointly used together, or they could be competitors or direct competitors. So that is what we call an industry, okay? But now, when I come to take each individual unit, that is the Benz company, the Toyota company, okay, if I separate these units, or I deal with one of the companies here as an individual, that is a firm. So a firm is a single unit of production, okay? That is one single unit of production is a firm. So you can call Benz a firm. You can call Toyota a firm. You can call the company that produces car tires a firm, sprays a firm, car seats a firm. But if we are to combine all these companies together, they form an industry, or they form a car producing industry, which is our industry A. So the term microeconomics and macroeconomics were first given by Ragnar Frisch in the year 1933. So they were the ones who first came up. He was the one who first came up with the term micro and macroeconomics. And again, we said that they took those terms from the Greek language, okay, which represents small and large, okay, to represent the two. So Professor J.M. Keynes is known as the father of modern macroeconomics. And he wrote the book titled The General Theory of Employment, Interest, and Money in the year 1936. And that played a vital role in the development of macroeconomics. So now, at this point, what is macroeconomics? We've already looked at what microeconomics is. We said microeconomics is basically looking at the economy from an individual units, okay? That is from firms, from industries, from those smaller units, okay? But when we talk about macroeconomics, we are saying that the word macros came from macro came from the word macros, right? It is a Greek word meaning large. And then the goal of macroeconomics is to study the behavior of the overall economy. Okay, so we are looking at the overall economy of nations, of territories. Okay, and that is the right way to address it, of territories. Okay, that is what the main goal or main aim of macroeconomics is to be able to study, measure, and then address the behavior of the overall economy, okay, of nations and territories, okay. So that is the main goal of macroeconomics. It does not seek to address individual units of in an economy, like taking firms differently, taking industries differently, and taking the government differently. No, it looks to aggregate all these people together, okay, or bring all these individual forces together to form one large unit, okay, and it tags that unit as what? An economy, or the economy of nations. Let me put it that way. So it examines the behavior of economic aggregates, such as aggregate income, or aggregate consumption, investments, and the overall level of prices. As we move on, you get to understand how important or key that income is, investment is, consumption is, and investment is, and the overall level of prices, which in this sense we call inflation, okay, or which in this sense is referring to inflation. How important these metrics are to measuring the overall economic growth, or economic growth rates of nations. They are very, very vital and important. Okay, so it deals with aggregate behavior, which is described as a behavior of all households and firms together. So you do not tackle them as an individual unit. And this is where the main difference comes, okay? Or the main difference is if you are explaining any concept under macroeconomics, explain it relative to the general behavior of the economy, okay? Or the general behavior of the economy. If you talk about households, if you talk about firms, deal with them as a unit, as a combined unit, okay, not as an individual unit, or don't explain a point using just a firm as an example. No, if you do that, you are redirecting your attention to microeconomics, okay. So you should explain all your points to the overall economy, okay, or the overall performance of an economy. So some of the key or important issues in macroeconomics are as follows. We are looking at what determines economic fluctuations, which is the business cycle. And when we are talking about the business cycle, we are basically looking at expansion, we are looking at contraction, we are looking at peak, and then we are looking at the trough. So these are the basic element that forms a business cycle. We'll look at that shortly. So in determining the business cycle, we draw a very, very simple graph, okay, where we plot the GDP of a nation against time, a given time period. So it can be, let's say, from the year 2000 to the year 2025. And we'll try and then analyze the pattern. So we'll plot, it's a graph. So we'll plot, how do you call it? GDP against time. So let's say this is our graph. We plot, this is our y-axis, this is our x-axis. And we are going to plot GDP on our y-axis. And then we'll plot year or time on our x-axis. And then when we do this, we are going to plot or graph that measures the fluctuations in GDP against time. And this is what we use to determine the specific phase of business cycle that we find ourselves in, okay? But after doing this, we have to do something else, or we have another unit that has to be calculated. And this is called the growth trend line. So there is a trend line that might look something like this. And we call this the GTR, or the growth trend line. And the GTL, and the growth trend line is calculated as the GDP over time. So when you divide the GDP by the time, okay, for each of the years and you plot them up, you are going to get an average of the movement, or an average of the increase or decrease over the period of time. And that creates a general sentiment that you are going to use to calculate the performance of an economy, which in this sense we call a business cycle. And peak is the highest point, trough is the lowest point before an expansion. When moving up, we call this an expansion. When coming down, we call this a contraction. We are going to look at that shortly. Okay, so and we're also going to look at why some countries grow faster than others. We said there are a lot of reasons that attributes to some countries growing faster than others. We'll talk about the population size being a factor. We will also talk about the level of technology being a factor and all those things. So we can talk about political instability and all those things being a factor. So we'll come to them also. So we'll look at what causes unemployment. So causes of unemployment. And under causes of unemployment, we are going to also look at the types of unemployment as well, because those things come hand in hand. And why are millions of people unemployed even when the economy is booming? So even at a growing economy, we could still be facing unemployment. And we are going to look at that. And we are going to look at what drives price changes or inflation, which is a very, very important topic in economics as a whole. Okay, so we are going to look at what drives price changes, which is inflation, and why the cost of living keeps rising. So we are going to look at all that as well. So now let us start looking at them. So apart from that, we look at the role of economic policies and government monetary and fiscal policies, how being part of a global economic system affects the economy of a country. So under the scope of macroeconomics, we look at the theory of income and employment, the theory of money, theory of general price level, theory of economic growth, theory of international trade. Please don't just worry about this, about all this. This session is just an intro. Okay, we will treat all this as individual topics. Okay, that's unemployment, economic growth. We will treat all those things as individual topics in the other session. So these are diagrams that gives you a feel of the general economic growth of nations. Okay, so you can see that this is how do you call it? Your business cycle. You can see your the growth trend line. You can see your GDP being plotted against the time period and all those stuffs. Okay. So graphs for unemployment and all those things. So now let's go straight to the main goals of macroeconomics. So if you are asked anywhere that what are the main goals of macroeconomics, so the entire study of macroeconomics is centered around the three things, okay? Or the entire reason, or the, let's say, the points of focus or the field of focus of macroeconomics, or what macroeconomics seem or aims to achieve, okay, is to cause economic growth. That is an increase in economic growth. We want to see an economy expanding. That is what we mean by economic growth. We want to see economies growing. Okay, we want to see a reduction in inflation. That is inflation levels dropping. And we want to see lower unemployment. These are the main goals that macroeconomics aims to achieve. One, we said economic growth, okay? And when we are talking about economic growth, we are typically talking about an increasing GDP, okay, representing an expansion. We are talking about, and please, let me draw the business cycle very, very fast and then indicate where all this thing falls in the business cycle, okay? So we said that you have the GDP, right? So let's call, you have the GDP. Let's say this is one, this is two, this is three, this is four, and please, we have all this in $1,000,000, okay? So what this means is that everything you see here is in $1,000,000. So $1,000,000, $2,000,000, $3,000,000, $4,000,000, okay? And let's call this GDP, okay? And then we call this time, or our time period. And then for the time period, let's say this is 2020. This is 2021. This is 2022, 2023, and what have you. Okay, so let's say within these years, the graph was something like this. Okay, and if we are to calculate our average, which is our growth trend line, let's say we are looking something like this. So this is our business cycle. Okay, so in our business cycle here, we said that if the graph is rising, we call it what? Expansion. So here we call it E, or expansion. So if it reaches the top, we call it our peak. So let's call it PK, which represents peak. At the lowest level, we call it our trough. Let's call it TR. Okay. And then when the graph is falling, we call it contraction. Let's call it CTR. And let us use this to explain this. So what you are saying is that basically we want to see a point where our economy is growing, okay? Where our GDP is generally rising. Everything is booming. Things are doing well. Okay. We want to see a point where inflation is low. Okay. But interesting enough, there is a negative relationship between an expanding economy and inflation. And this is something that I don't want to use a word cannot be prevented, but this is something that always exists. And this is why it exists. If an economy is growing or if an economy is experiencing an expansion, what is literally happening is that we have investments on the rise, we have consumer confidence on the rise. So investment is on the rise. You have confidence on the rise. You have employment on the rise. You have incomes on the rise. Okay. So all these things are increasing. What does this mean? This means that the more the income, the more people have money to spend, right? Look, people have money to spend, and the more people spend, it causes something that we call that we call demand pool inflation, which means that now the demand of goods and services are rising. Okay, so demand is on the rise. With all things being constant, if demand rises with supply being constant, okay, what will happen? You have prices also rising. And the reason is because if you are a supplier, this is the same thing that happened during the COVID period. When COVID-19 came, and then the lockdown was issued. Okay, I think a day before the lockdown was issued also, we had a lot of pressure happening, or a lot of people wanted to stock up goods in their homes. So they wanted to kind of buy goods in bulk and stock up their homes because everything was uncertain. People did not really know when the lockdown will be over. So if you go to the marketplace and people were selling gari, as at that time, I don't know how much an olunka of gari was selling, but let's say it was selling at, let's say, 20 cedis before. Okay, but because of the pressure as at that time, the price of an olunka of gari increased from 20 cedis to like 40 cedis. Okay. Why did it increase from 20 cedis to 40 cedis? Because the demand was high. Meanwhile, the supply was constant. Okay. People were coming and they were buying. And look, this is how sellers are thinking. Let's think like a typical seller. You are selling X unit of commodities, okay? And that is all what you have to sell. But now people are demanding way more than the amount of units that you have to supply. What are you thinking? Look, if I even increase the price by 100%, people will still buy. People want it. They have no option than to buy. What would happen? Prices would go higher. Why? Because there would be scarcity, right? We said demand rising, supply remaining constant leads to scarcity, price rises. And that is what literally happens around this point. And once price rises, we call it inflation, right? The persistent rise in the prices of commodities. And that is a reason why during expansion, always inflation is at the rise. Okay. So, but the main goal of macroeconomics is to make sure that we experience increase in, or we experience economic growth, whilst at the same time reducing inflation to the bare minimum. And in such scenario, the government has to set in and then creates a government policy that addresses the persistence inflation. Okay. They can come in to regulate prices in the market and institute other measures to tackle the persistent rises in prices. And we saw the same thing happen when this particular government came into power. Just a few months after it came into power, I realized that the dollar rate dropped massively. CD to dollar rate, I mean, dropped massively. And why do you think that rate had to drop? Because that was one of the prime causes of inflation, or the prime reasons why goods and services were constantly on the rise. Ghana is a country that depends heavily on imports or imported goods. So what that means is that if the dollar rate kind of goes up, or the CD depreciates against the dollar, what happens is that it causes, or it leads to um, uh, an expensive imports. Okay, we have to exchange more cedis for dollars. Hence, everything that we bring in a country in the name of imports become expensive. And if we try selling them, they become much more expensive. So goods like mobile phones, like vehicles, their prices tend to skyrocket significantly. So an attempt to reduce the prices of goods will mean to artificially engineer. It was obviously an artificial engineering of the how do you call it, the exchange rate. Okay, so artificially engineer a, a sharp fall, okay, of the exchange rate in an attempt to make our imports cheaper. Okay, and if our imports become cheaper, that means automatically the prices of goods will drop. And then our imports becoming cheaper. You can also talk about oil, that is petrol and other stuffs, which generally causes a reduction in the prices of commodities. So governments can set in to regulate the increasing inflation around expansion. Okay, and then we have the peak level, where basically what happens around the peak level is that unemployment starts to, employment starts to flatten because at expansion, everything is booming. Employment is on the rise. I said that earlier. But at the peak level, employment starts to flatten. And then as employment starts to flatten, we have, how do you call it? Other metrics such as your GDP starting to also flatten as well. And all other growth metrics starting to flatten. And then the next thing that follows is a contraction, which some also prefer to call a recession. Okay, but when defining, there is a difference between a contraction and a recession. A recession is basically, let's say, an economic decline. Okay, that lasts for more than 6 months. It's called an economic recession. Okay, so basically during a contraction, what happens is that you have your GDP falling significantly. Okay, so the fall what causes the fall is basically a reduction in terms of your employment rates, and gradually your employment rate starts to turn negative. That is, unemployment starts to set in. We have all other growth metrics, okay, starting to turn negative. And that is where your contraction takes place. And when contraction takes place, it becomes relevant for government to also set in to find a solution to that. And gradually, the economy starts to experience what you call a trough. A trough is the lowest point of a contraction where the economic downfall begins to experience a turnover. Okay, so we experience a lower peak, and then everything gradually starts to turn around, and then we have the whole cycle, as in happening over and over again. Okay, so this is the key point. The key point is that whenever there is an expansion in a business cycle, what happens is what we experience inflation. Okay, the prices of goods increase, and whenever there is a contraction, we experience unemployment. Okay, so we experience unemployment. So the main effect of expansion, or the main negative effect of expansion, is inflation, whilst that of contraction is employment. So macroeconomics looks to address these three basic problems. That is, to foster economic growth, to lower inflation, and to lower the rate of unemployment. And that is easily visible from our business cycle, okay, which is a key indicator of the economic strength of nations. So please, are we cool with that, or anybody has any question before we progress? So please, any question at this point? Any question at this point? Okay, please, if you all understand, or if we are all together, please kindly give a thumbs up so that we know that we are following. Okay, thank you, Mr. Desmond. Ish. Are you there? Okay, so let's continue. It's really important that you get to understand this. And please, feel free to ask questions if we have one. Okay, that's the reason why we are here, to make sure everybody understands what is going on here. So if you have any question, please don't keep it to yourself. Just ask it out and then let's talk about it. So goal one, which is output growth, or which is economic growth. So we are saying that each government or economy is interested in increasing the production of goods and services, both in the short run and in the long run. Okay. So basically, we are looking to increase our GDP. And we said the GDP is the measure of goods and services that are kind of in a particular, how do you call it? Um, how do you call this? I mean, there's some total of goods and services in a particular period of time, which is a financial year. That is usually 1 year in a domestic economy is what our GDP is. Okay, so when we are talking about GDP, the basic thing we are talking about is the total value of goods and services produced in a domestic economy in a financial year. Okay, so what this means is that when we are looking at output growth, we are basically looking at goods and services, which is our GDP. Okay, an increase in our goods and services, which is an increase in our GDP, both in the short run and in the long run. So in increasing output, the ultimate goal is to get closer and closer to the economy's potential output, which is a maximum sustainable output of goods and services that a nation can produce. Okay, so we basically want to make sure that we get closer as possible to the country's main capacity of production, or the main country's economic potential. And that is a point, because look, as much as we intend to increase Ghana's GDP, okay, or every government's goal is to increase Ghana's GDP, there is a limit at which that can reach, okay. We cannot say that we want to obtain a GDP growth that is greater than that of Nigeria. Please, it is not possible and it cannot happen. Why? Because Nigeria has a way huge or larger population as compared to Ghana. One point. Number two, their land size is relatively huge. Okay, please, the reason why population is a key contributor to the GDP of a nation as an indirect contributor is because it leads to an enormous labor force. Okay, in an economy. Okay, so we can talk about that factor as well. Yeah, leading to GDP growth. And we can also talk about the land size, okay? That is availability of natural resources and those kind of stuff. And that makes it impossible to compare a country with the size of Ghana to Nigeria in terms of GDP. But that doesn't necessarily mean that their rate of economic growth is better than that of ours. Along the line, we get to understand what GDP per capita and GNP per capita and those things are. And those things are much, much more better way of measuring economic growth than that of GDP in general, because there are a lot of bias to it. And some of the bias to it is the size of the country and all those kind of stuff. For instance, if you take China like this, China, their GDP is crazily huge, okay? If you take a country like UK, their GDP is very, very insignificant as to that of China. But if you divide their GDP, the GDP of China, by the number of people in China or the population in China, it is way smaller. Okay, it is way insignificant as compared to that of UK. Why? Because UK has a much, much smaller population in relation to that of China. Okay, so I don't know if you really, really get what I'm trying to explain here. Okay, but the general idea here is that the ultimate goal is to get closer and closer to the economy's potential output, which is a maximum sustainable output of goods and services that a nation can produce. So increasing a country's output towards a potential output level is important because it has a direct impact on poverty levels, okay? So it has a direct impact of poverty levels and the standard of living within the economy through the GDP. Okay, so we are saying that increasing a country's output or economic growth in general has a direct impact on poverty levels. And what do you think the impact is? We stated earlier that economic growth means increased employment, right? And then an increase in income, right? Yeah. So if you have a rise in economic growth, more people are employed, more people are gaining income. What it literally means is that poverty levels reduces, or the amount or the level of poverty in that particular nation reduces. That's why if you go to a country like, if you compare a Western country to and most of African countries, you realize that the poverty level here is very, very high. It's because of the general rate in economic growth. Okay, we basically do not have the facilities. You basically do not have the system to, as in, employ our people. Okay, and even if people are employed, they are basically underemployed. And to be underemployed means to be employed below your capabilities. Someone has a degree, he has a master's degree in, let's say, procurement and supply chain management, but he's now working as a security man. Why? Because there is no job. And look, this thing is very, very practical. Eh? I had a friend, okay, I had a friend who is a qualified biomedical engineer, okay, but then was working as a fuel attendant, a fuel pump attendant. Why do you think that was literally happening? It was because we do not have the system to employ all those people. Okay, so they are in this case underemployed, and the impact of underemployment is basically um, a fall in income levels. Basically, they are not paid what they deserve to be paid, okay, or they are underpaid. As because they are in unemployment, they are underpaid, okay, and that generally increases the poverty levels in our side of the world, especially in Africa, and leads to a very, very bad standard of living. Standard of living is directly opposite to cost of living, okay. When the cost of living is high, standard of living is low. Okay, I'm trying to incorporate some of these concepts. Okay, so when the cost of living is high, standard of living is low. Okay, and when the cost of living is low, the standard of living is relatively high. So a sustained increase in output level increases a country's ability to finance education, public health, environmental improvement, etc., which goes a long way to improve the general quality of life. So when we're able to sustain an increase in output, what happens? Government has a wider tax base, right? There is a wider scope of taxation. Government is able to tax more people. The tax revenue increases, okay? And that means that government has the ability to spend more on things like educational needs, which is building of schools, health facilities, and improving overall environment, okay? And all those kind of stuff. So basically, we are concluding here that macroeconomics has a base goal of how do you call it, increasing economic growth for a varied number of reasons we've just looked at. And one of them is also to achieve, as in how to achieve that. So to achieve this goal, governments are usually concerned about the following, which is a short run and long run changes in output growth. So we looked at that from the business cycle, right? And we are basically saying that government is very much interested, okay, in order to cause economic growth, governments must understand the reason for the happenings or the occurrences in the business cycle. So we indicated the business cycle here. So we said that it can be an expansion, it can be a peak, it can be a contraction, it can be a trough. So basically, government has to understand if there's a contraction or there's a recession, the government needs to be able to figure out or understand what is causing that. And after understanding the causation factor, the government will be able to implement policies that can be able to mitigate that, or that can how do you call it, halt that particular fall in economic growth or that particular, let's say, contraction, and look at the best ways that the economy can rise back to its feet, that is, expand. So, for example, the government is interested in determining the expansionary and contractionary periods in an economy. Knowing what is causing these cycles in the economy will better inform the managers of the economy what measures to put in place for short-run output growth. So if the government is able to understand the causation factors, it is able to implement policies or measures to address that. So this is a typical example of your of a business cycle. Okay, so you can see that the fluctuations in output growth is illustrated using a business cycle diagram. So this diagram is called a business cycle diagram. I was about to say, let's call it BCD for short, but please, BCD is binary coded as if. Yeah, so that's the how do you call it, business cycle diagram. And we said that it is our gross domestic product as against our time, right? And we said this graph here, that is the blue graph, represents plotting our GDP against the time period or the years. And then we have a line in here. You can see that there is an average line here that smooths all these movements, or it creates a general sentiment. Basically, if the average line here is rising, we are saying that although there are ups and downs in the economy, but generally the economy is experiencing a growth, okay, or the economy is growing in general, okay. But if this particular line here is falling, then we are saying that generally the economy is declining, or the economy is experiencing a fall. Please accept. All right, sorry. Let's continue. So we said that this line here is called the growth trend line, right? And it is calculated by finding an average of GDP against time. And that gives us a general sentiment of the economy. Please, a second. All right, please, let's continue. Okay, so I think I've already illustrated how to draw your business cycle diagram. Or please, should I illustrate that again? Or we are fine with that? Are you fine with that? Okay. Okay, so I think the thumbs up says we are fine with that. So let's continue. So from this diagram, we can be able to derive a general sentiment of what is happening in an economy, okay? So look, the line, this here looks very, very smooth. There was a diagram up here that gives a vivid picture of it. Okay, so we are currently at page 22, so let's go up. And then let me identify the diagram. This is how a real diagram will look like, okay? So realize that this diagram doesn't look as smooth as the other one looks like, right? So this, in reality, that how it will look like, because you would have to plot your GDP against a wide variety of time period. Okay, that means that the points will be closer. So if you are to draw everything up, you are going to get something like this. Okay, and this is that of Ghana. So we are saying that in the long term, we have our average line right here, right, which is indicating that our economy is growing. Although our GDP is growing, I mean, although this growth is not very, very, let me say, as at a point in time, realized that the growth was much slower. Here, it was very, very flat. That was between the year 1961 to the year 1982, right? And after 1982, we started to see a sharp rise, right? Not that sharper, okay? That was 1985 to 2003, right? And after 2003, we saw a massive rise in our GDP right here, okay? So this gives us the average sentiment of how our GDP has been performing from the year 1961, okay? And you will see that generally it's been rising, okay? But then if you look at the graph itself, you realize that, look, the rise has not been smooth. This, what happened? Between the year 1961 to the year 1964, there was a minor rise, okay? And then a sharp fall between 1964 to 1967. And after that, so here we can call this um, a contraction, okay? So there was a contraction or a recession that took place between that period. And then after that, we saw another rise again between 1967 to 1970. After that period, we saw another fall again. And that fall fell below our average, okay? And that fall lasted for between 1970 and 1976. That is 6 good years of continuous economic decline. And that is our contraction, or that right there was a contraction. And if you are interpreting this in economic terms, what you are trying to mean happened between 1970 to 1976 was that there was a fall in employment, or there was unemployment, okay? There was a fall in income. There was a fall in all other metrics that measures economic growth within that period of time. Basically, investment was low. When I talk about all other metrics, I'm talking about things like investments was basically low. We are talking about production, or domestic production was very, very low. Okay, please, whenever we are talking about GDP, we are talking about domestic production. Okay, domestic production has a key role to play. I was about to talk about the difference between GDP and GNP, but I think it's very like not yet time to talk about that yet. So a fall in domestic production of goods and services and all other metrics were practically on the decline between this period of time. But between on the year 1976, we experienced what we call a TROUGH. Okay, TROUGH is spelled I think TROUGH. Okay, and that practically represents the lowest point of a recession or a contraction, where the economy gradually starts to reverse or starts to go back to the expansionary phase. So between 1976 and 1979, the economy started regaining its feet again, and we experienced a very, very, how do you call it? Sharp increase or sharp expansion right there. And what do we say happens in expansion? We have an increase in employment, we have an increase in investment, we have an increase in consumer confidence, we have an increase in all basic measurements of economic growth, except inflation. Okay, we said that during expansion there is a fall in how do you call it? There is inflation, okay, or there is a fall. How do you call it? What am I even saying? There is inflation, okay, or there is a rise in inflation. Let me put it that way. So please, the reason why this is very crucial to understand is that if at any point in time we are to have objectives, which I believe might happen in our economics, I don't think it will be straight off session be like that. I think they'll do it like how they did last time. Probably, I cannot tell yet. I'm not sure. Okay. So there could be some true or false questions where it will be made to justify like we did, or there could be how do you call it? Objectives and then subjectives attached to it, because the past questions does also give that indication as well that there's been times where that has happened. Okay. So if that happens, these are things that could be asked. Okay. That is during expansion. They could give you, let's say, investment, those things, and you just use to figure out that. Yeah. So after that, we had yes, please.
Mr. Isaac,
Yes, please.
I have a question.
Okay.
Yes, do we have positive inflation, inflation that do not affect the people, or we just have the general one, which is a negative part?
Okay, so your question is, we have inflation that doesn't affect the people.
Yeah, like consumers or something like that.
Okay. So basically, inflation is a persistent rise in the prices of commodities. You can argue that when inflation occurs at the same time when income is on the rise, it could be of less impact, logically, okay. And that happens during expansion. Income is on the rise, and the inflation is caused as a result of the spending power. Okay, basically, people have more money to spend, and because of their ability to spend, it causes demand pull inflation, and that coupled with an increase in income might not affect the people technically, but that doesn't still make it positive though, because for the consumer, they will still wish that the prices decline. But it might not affect them so much because they have much purchasing power now. They have the money to spend. That means even if we increase the prices of commodities, they can still buy them. So if you go to abroad, for instance, probably, I've not been to abroad before, probably, or most likely, you might find that the prices of goods might be relatively expensive than they are here. I don't know. I cannot say that for certain. Okay, but even if it is that way, we can basically say that the people have the ability to spend or to purchase those goods, so they wouldn't complain. Okay, so I wouldn't say that there is anything like positive inflation, but there is a situation or scenario where inflation might not really affect the population that much, and that is a scenario where inflation is coupled with a rise in employment and income. But if inflation rises and then income drops at the same time, that would be a very, very terrible situation. Okay, because you have the income of people dropping, and at the same time, the price of goods are going up. And that is the same thing that happened during COVID. Look, people were losing their jobs. Okay, people were coming home, people were being laid off, people were not getting paid. People's businesses were no more functioning. Restaurants were collapsing. They couldn't work because look, everybody is at home, lockdown. Who come to your restaurant to come and eat? And those kind of stuff. Yet the prices of goods were going up because the demands were soaring up. People wanted to stock up food and those kind of things. And then it led to the prices generally going up, which is inflation. Okay. So that scenario might not really be to the comfortability of the population. Okay. And you can argue that in that sense, inflation becomes a paining factor. Okay. But in general, inflation is not something so positive that a nation can boast of. Look, please, I hope your question is answered. Hello, Kayu. Okay, I think he's out. All right, so let's continue. So I just use this diagram to basically explain the business cycle. Okay, that is to indicate that this diagram that you are seeing here is just a graph work. Okay, it doesn't really represent the actual overlook of a business cycle. It is much rougher than this. Okay, so we said the lowest level before the rise is a true. The highest level before a contraction is the peak. Okay, and the fall or the contraction can also be called a recession, depending on how long the contraction should last. Okay, and then the growth trend line is what creates or what fans out this. So let us move down. So price stability and low inflation, that is goal 2. So we are saying that a low inflation rate or stable price level is another important goal of governments or managers of economies, okay? So governments basically want to make sure that inflation is as low as it can be, okay? And then prices remain as stable as they can be. Stable prices basically means that, look, we can say or we can predict that next month the price of goods will be the same, or the increment in the price of goods will be very, very insignificant, or the reduction will be very insignificant. That means that price is relatively stable. But in a case where we cannot predict, look, let's say the year started from January to February, the price of, let's say, vehicles or let's say motorbikes increased from 15,000 Ghana cedi. Let's say the price of a Royal motorbike increased from 15,000 cedis to 25,000 cedis in just 1 month. Another month from 25,000, it goes straight to 30,000 Ghana cedis. Another month, it drops from 30,000 Ghana cedis down to 22,000 Ghana cedis. Then another month, it rises from 22,000 Ghana cedis back to 30,000 Ghana cedis again. This economy basically has an unstable price, okay? Your price is not stable. It's not, you can't easily predict what is going to happen the next month. And that is what we mean by an economy being unstable in terms of its pricing, okay? So the government wants to make sure that these scenarios are avoided, okay? And ensure that inflation remains as low as it can be and price remain as stable as it can be, because unstable prices discourages investments. If somebody wants to come and invest in your country and he cannot, let's say, he calculates the amount of investment that he will need to start his business in your country, and the next month everything changes. The price almost doubles. And then another month, look, he can't even calculate the amount of profit he will make because everything is so much unstable in that particular economy. It will discourage them from coming in. So when there is price instability and when there is inflation, it basically discourages investments and frustrates all parties in an economy. So the government's aim is to make sure that he creates an atmosphere where all parties in an economy can thrive. And to do that, he has to lower inflation and stabilize price, which is very, very, very important. So high prices or unstable prices level is very, very costly to society. With high inflation, the purchasing power of money erodes quickly. When we talk about purchasing power, we are talking about what money can buy. Okay. Basically, if I'm holding 20 cedis in a day, what can 20 cedis get me? That is what purchasing power is. And purchasing power fluctuates as the value or as the price of goods rises and drop. This is a relation between purchasing power and the prices of goods and services. As the prices of goods rise or as inflation occurs, purchasing power drops or declines. Because if you are holding 20 cedi today, and then your watch seller sells watch from, let's say, 10 cedis, or let's say you are holding 20 cedis, and that 20 cedi can buy you watch 10 cedis and you'll be okay. And then in the afternoon, you can get, let's say, Burkina 5 cedis and you'll be okay. And okay, let's increase our money to 25 cedis, okay? And in the evening, you can get kenke 5 cedis, fish 5 cedis, and you'll be okay. This is basically an ideal amount that you need to survive, okay? Which is 25 cedis in a day, okay? Only if that is very realistic. So in another month, everything changes. The price of goods between so high. Now you are holding the same 25 cedis. You go to your watch seller. Amelia tells you that now he does not sell 10 cedis anymore. Or even if she sells 10 cedis, now if you buy 10 cedis, it is no more the 10 cedis you used to buy. It doesn't really satisfy you. You now have to buy watch 15 cedis. the Burkina seller is saying that he does not sell Burkina 5 cedi again. The Burkina seller is now selling Burkina 10 cedis. Now, with that same 25 cedis, you can't get your Kenke anymore. You can only get your Wachi and your Burkina. So what do you think has happened? The purchasing power has dropped relatively, okay? So if price rises, purchasing power does what? It drops. And if your inflation drops, purchasing power rises. That is the relationship between purchasing power and inflation. The higher the inflation, the lower your purchasing power, the lower the amount of goods and services money can buy. Okay. And if inflation drops or inflation goes low, the more goods and services that money can buy. Okay. So that is the relationship between purchasing power and inflation. And these are general concepts in economics that we need to really grasp and understand. So here we are saying that this forces people to spend money as soon as they get it, which negatively impacts the overall growth of economy. Because look, people cannot save anymore. Immediately they get the money, they have to spend everything. Okay, now things are expensive. At first, you used to buy fuel, 800 cedis, and you're okay. Now you have to buy fuel, 1,500 cedis for that same journey. What that means is that now 700 cedis, which you could have saved previously, now has to be spent. Okay, and that negatively impacts an economy. So the government has to look at finding ways and means to stop that. So price stability is not necessarily the same as zero inflation, but instead steady levels or low moderate inflation is regarded as ideal. So I explained what price stability is previously. We are saying that we are basically talking about a scenario where at least inflation is predictable, okay, where price is not all over the place, or price is not just rising in there, it just increases from 15 cedis to 25 cedis. Tomorrow, the price increase from 25 cedis to 50 cedis. We want something that at least could be flatter, okay? At least we can predict, say, oh, in the next 3 months, I want to save to buy a bicycle. The cost of a bicycle is 2,500 cedis. It will take me 3 months to get 2,500 cedis. And I can say with confidence that after 3 months, the prices of bicycles will still be 2,500 cedis. Okay, that is what we call price stability. Even if it increases from 2,500 cedis, at least it should be 2,600 cedis. Still, we can say price is stable. Okay, but there shouldn't be the scenario where price will just you save 3 months, you get a 2,500 cedis, you go to the bicycle seller, he's now telling you the price is 3,500 cedis. That is a case of price instability. Okay, and that is one scenario that we are looking to prevent, or one thing that macroeconomics is looking to prevent. So zero inflation is often undesirable in an economy, or in other senses, we can say zero inflation is even unattainable. Okay, it cannot. It's very difficult to be realized in an economy. No matter what happens, look, the price of goods and services will increase, but the problem is the rate of increase that causes the problem or not. At least the increment must be reasonable. So if drivers will increase their lorry fare, we want them to increase it. Let's say if the lorry fare is 2 cedis, we want, let's say, 2 cedis 20 pesos, 2 cedis 30 pesos. We don't want to see 2 cedis today and the next day they are telling us that is 3 cedi. Why? Because the price of petrol has gone up. No, we don't want to see things like that. People will start to complain. But if it increases from 2 cedi to 2 cedi 20 pesos, you hardly see people complain because the rate of increase is very, very insignificant. Okay, so we are looking to at least farm out your inflation rates, whilst acknowledging that zero inflation is often undesirable and in some scenarios unattainable. So the most common measure of inflation is the consumer price index. So the consumer price index is basically an index that is used to measure the inflation, okay, in a particular country over a period of time. So the CPI, which is consumer price index, is a measure of the average change in the general prices of goods and services over time. Okay, so we are talking about the average change, that is change in the price of goods and services over time, and that gives us our consumer price index, and that is a measure of a good measure of inflation, or the standard measure of inflation. So CPI represents changes in prices of all goods and services purchased by the household, okay? And income taxes and investment items such as stocks, bonds, and life insurances are not included in this computation. So basically, when we are calculating inflation, we do not look at things like stocks, bonds, and life insurances. Those things are not computed or are not considered in the calculation or computation of CPI, which is Consumer Price Index. And we said the third goal of macroeconomics is to measure unemployment, or to lower unemployment. And that's the third thing that every government or every nation seeks to achieve. Look, the government or the managers of an economy are looking to make sure that employment is as low as it can be. And the reason is because when employment is relatively high, you know what happens? It causes poverty, right? The standard of living becomes very bad, and that automatically leads to the rise in social vices. Now, in the world that we are in, it is very difficult to associate social vices with standard of living, honestly, because we are living in a system which is filled with moral decay. And I understand that even if you go to the Western countries, which have very lower rates of unemployment, and they even have good incomes, the rate of social vices are incredibly high. But just that they are very manageable in those places, okay? At least they are very manageable. But when you go to places where the rate of unemployment is low, you can find one thing to be certain: social vices will relatively be high. Look, when we are talking about social vices, we are talking about things like prostitution, things like armed robbery, things like this kidnapping, okay? And this is very important to mention. Currently, if you go to our neighboring countries, one of the things that you find is this bandit things. When you go to other countries like Nigeria and the others, you find rise in kidnapping issues. Look, people have just lost trust in their economy. They cannot find jobs. They are graduates. They had hopes that, oh, after completing, the system will be able to offer them employment. The system will be able to provide them with an income, or the system will be able to provide them with a livelihood. But after they completed all right, they came out there and they realized that, look, all the hopes that they had, all the dreams that they had was zero. They had struggled. Probably he came up with out with a first class. He had done all his best to have a good education, but he came out and the system was not able to provide him with a job, which is unemployment. He's been home for 2 years without hope, and now he's resorted to social vices. To if the person is a lady, has resorted to engaging in prostitution as a means of making an income. If he's a man, has resorted to indulging in, let's say, internet scams, fraud, to how do we call it, to armed robbery, okay, to kidnapping, to banditry, and to other illegal ways of making money as an alternate means of making an income. So every government or manager of an economy wants to prevent or to narrow out these consequences, okay? And as a result of that, they have to make sure that unemployment rates are at least reduced to the bare minimum. If it cannot even go down to zero, which is considered also impossible or unattainable in some cases, at least to make sure that it goes down to a level which is a standard. Okay, so the most common measure used here is the unemployment rate. The unemployment rate is a percentage of labor force that is willing and able to work. Please, let's take note of this. We do not tax someone as unemployed if the person is not willing and able to work. Let's say your father is Dangote, okay, and then your father gives you a monthly allowance of 5,000 Ghana cedis for doing nothing. And because of that, you tell yourself that you are not going to work. There are people who feel that they have access to family royalties. There are family businesses, and every month they are given a certain amount of money as their share of income from family properties. And because of that, they feel that they cannot work or they will not work. Those people are not willing to work. Okay. And when we're also talking about unemployment, we are talking about people who are able to work. We don't count people who are unable to work. Like, for instance, the person has encountered an accident that has rendered the person incapable of working, or that has left the person paralyzed. The person does not have the means to work. He cannot work. If you send the person to any workplace, he cannot work. Okay. Or the person is experiencing mental instability or psychological issues and the person cannot work. That person is not said to be unemployment in this sense or in this case. So we are talking about the percentage of the labor force that is willing and able to work. Okay. But this and are also actively looking for employment, but the system cannot offer them jobs, or the system cannot offer them employment. Those people are people who are said to be unemployed. Okay, so when we are looking to calculate the unemployment rate, these are things that we look at. For example, the aged, or people who are aged, they are retired or they are on pension. Those people we do not count them as part of when we are talking about unemployment. Why? Because basically, look, they are not able to work. They are not even willing to work. Even if they are willing to work, they are not able to work. Okay. And they are not even also looking for work. So currently, we don't count those people as part of the unemployed. Okay. So the labor force includes those who are employed and those who are unemployed. Okay, so when we are talking about the labor whole as a whole, the labor force, I mean, as a whole, we are talking about those who are employed and those who are unemployed. Okay, who are within the working age or who are capable of working. But the system cannot offer them jobs. So we call those people as unemployed people. So stable employment do not mean zero unemployment. Again, when in the same scenario as we tagged inflation, we said when there is a stable rate of employment, it does not necessarily mean zero unemployment. Okay, unemployment can hardly be zero, though theoretically it can exist, but in practicality it cannot exist. Later, when we are looking at unemployment, we look at something that is called equilibrium. Okay, for unemployment. That is a level where the demand for labor is equal to the supply for labor. Okay, in that particular sense, we say that basically there would be the unemployment rate will be zero. Okay, but that exists theoretically because the demand for labor in the practical sense might never be equal to the supply for labor. One would always exceed the other for one reason or the other. So the natural rate of unemployment, the natural rate of employment over full unemployment is described as unemployment rate that is consistent with an economy operating at potential GDP. Please, we are going to look at all these calculations at under section 5, which is unemployment. So don't worry. So in some economies, full employment is associated with unemployment rate of 5% to 7%. So you see what I was explaining here, that a zero unemployment rate is practically unattainable. Full unemployment in most cases here is associated with a 5% to 7% rate of unemployment. We are saying that no matter what, there will be some level of unemployment in an economy, but the main goal or our main goal is to send that to the bare minimum. Okay. So let us look at when we're also talking about low unemployment, it can take one of these four forms. Employment cannot occur in one of these four forms. It can be frictional, it can be structural, it can be cyclical, and it can be seasonal. What are the difference between this? Let us look at the difference between this. AMA, okay, I'm using a practical example. So let's use AMA as a case study. So let's say Ama is a teacher, and Ama is teaching at Ama is a lecturer, okay, and Ama is a lecturer in University of Ghana, okay. But at a point in time, she feels like she needs to move on and then look for work somewhere else or lecture somewhere else because probably maybe she's not so satisfied with the conditions of service, or maybe another reason. Or it might just be like she's been in university, she wants another working environment or working experience. So she decides to move to another place, okay? That is, let's say, KNUST. She sends an application to KNUST, okay? And she's confident that she's going to gain that job. So because of that, she quits her employment with University of Ghana, or she decides to terminate her contract with University of Ghana. Okay. Now, this happened in January 2025. Okay. Now, between January to February, Ama was home, or Dr. Ama was home till February, where she was called by KNUST and she started work. What this means is that between, let's say, the 1st of January to the 1st of February, Ama was unemployed. She was not working. Okay. And that kind of unemployment is called frictional unemployment. It occurs because, or it's occurred because she was transitioning between one job to the other. Okay. And that is what frictional unemployment typically means. It is basically an unemployment that occurs when individuals are temporarily unemployed whilst transitioning between jobs or entering the workforce for the first time. So that is what frictional unemployment is. So basically, the period where Ama is unemployed whilst transitioning between as a lecturer of the University of Ghana to KNUST is called frictional unemployment. So I believe we all understand this. So let us look at structural unemployment. Okay, so I'll use the same Ama, who is a lecturer in the University of Ghana, as a case study. And please, Ama is an imaginary figure, please. So let me just clarify that. So Ama is an imaginary figure. Okay, so Ama here is an imaginary lecturer, okay, in the University of Ghana. And again, let's say Ama is good at lecturing, okay? So she's good at lecturing, but it's not good with using, let's say, digital tools. Digital tools like projectors, like navigating away on Teams and those kind of stuff. So at a point in time, University of Ghana told Ama that, okay, we are transferring you to the Department of Distance Education. And transferring Ama to the Department of Distance Education means that Ama now has to understand the online architecture, okay? Has to understand how to use things like Sakai, use things like Microsoft Teams, how to regulate her meetings, I mean, and all those things, okay? But Ama did not really have digital skills. And because of that, when she was sent there, she could not sustain her job. She got fired because she became very, very inefficient. Now, Ama is now unemployed. Why? Because although although the jobs are there or the job opportunities are there, but look, her qualifications does not match the current job structure, which is her ability to use all these digital tools. Okay. So she basically becomes unemployed. Okay. Probably maybe she doesn't even know how to use those basic stuff. So she basically becomes unemployed. And that style of unemployment or that scenario is called structural unemployment, where basically the employment opportunities are there, all right, but there is a mismatch between the skills of the people and then the, how do you call it, the available employment opportunities. They do not match. And usually this occurs when there is a change in technology, okay, or this occurs as a result of, let's say, technological advancement or shifts in industries, okay, or the mode of operation of industry. Let's say you can be a worker in a company and all of a sudden they will change the machine and introduce a new machine. And you do not have the skills to operate that machine. And probably the company does not also has that time for training and that time for training, okay. Probably it will take you 3 months to master the new machine. But this is a company that needs to be producing 24/7. Does it mean that the company has to shut down and wait for you for 3 months to be able to understand how to use the new machineries? No, they will sack you and they'll bring in someone who is a technician or who knows how to use that new machinery. Okay, so that style of employment where the jobs are there, but the skills cannot secure them job is what we call the structural unemployment. Okay, so we now understand what frictional unemployment, what structural is. Frictional is the unemployment created while transitioning between or from one job to the another. Okay, and structural unemployment is basically the unemployment that is caused as a result of a mismatch between job opportunities and then the skill set of the workforce or the labor force. And we also have cyclical unemployment. So cyclical unemployment is a kind of unemployment that occurs during economic downturns or recession. When we say economic recession, we are talking about a place where there is a major decline in economic growth, or where an economy is experiencing a negative shock. It's experiencing a shock that it has caused the economy to basically decline. And an example of that is COVID-19. So when COVID-19 occurred, what happened? Basically, we had a lot of people losing their jobs. They had done nothing wrong. They had the skills to operate. They had basically not done anything wrong to their employees. They had not displayed bad behavior. They had not done anything bad, but they had to be laid off. Why? Because look, basically, demand had fallen as a result of the lockdown that took place. Let's use a restaurant as a case study. If we use a restaurant as a case study, those were one of the fields which were largely affected. Nobody was nobody were going out to patronize this restaurant because there were policemen in town. You could not go out, okay, during the lockdown. I think there were only some, I don't know, I've forgotten the exact way, but there were specific groups of people who are allowed to move out and those kind of stuff. Like, and even if you are allowed to go out, you cannot overcrowd yourself in a place. That means that restaurants could not have people there. Okay. So restaurants will basically, let's call this restaurant as Ames Restaurant. Ames Restaurant has 30 workers. Because of lockdown, the restaurants cannot basically operate anymore. They cannot pay their workers. They have to lay off their workers. Okay. Their workers have done nothing wrong, but they've been laid off. And that kind of unemployment is cyclical. But now let us take this from this sense. This same COVID-19 pandemic, you can explain the unemployment cause also as structural, okay? Structural in the sense that, look, although the kind of unemployment cause was cyclical, there were also some professions which demanded a shift in the skill set, okay? Like teachers. They were basically in universities. I think in University of Ghana and other universities, they went fully online and they were operating from online. Examinations were fully online, offsite, and those kind of stuff. Okay, so though they were operating, but it meant that all the lecturers quickly had to adjust themselves to the digital framework very, very, very quick. And assuming you're a lecturer and you cannot quickly adjust yourself to this digital framework, you'll be found wanting and you might lose your job. And it's happened in several other sectors where there are people who were functioning as accountants for companies and other things. And now they were tasked to work from home. Okay, though they were working, but they were asked to work from home. And then working from home, you now have to work from your device. And assuming you are not a tech savvy or you are not a computer literate, what will happen to you? You lose your job. You cannot be able to work. Okay. And that literally means that unemployment has also happened right there. And that kind of unemployment is also structural. So when using something like a pandemic or something, you could use any scenario that fits to explain that type of unemployment. So far as it fits the explanation perfectly, okay. But in this case, we are talking about cyclical, and in talking about cyclical with regards to COVID-19 pandemic, which was a practical case of economic recession, we can use a scenario of people losing their jobs for no reason as a result of the pandemic or the recession. So please, when we are talking about cyclical, always there should be a component of economic decline. There should be a component of a downturn. There should be a component of a recession. Please, at all costs and at all points in time, this thing should happen. If people should lose their job for no reason, and that is not as a result of a recession or a contraction, you do not classify that as cyclical. Okay. Now let us look at seasonal unemployment. So seasonal unemployment, as the name suggests, is an unemployment that occurs as a result of changes in seasons. For instance, you have a company that produces umbrella. Okay. What do you literally think would happen in the rainy season? Demand will go up significantly, right? So let me clean this screen, and let's say we are still using our AMA as a case study. So AMA has an umbrella production factory or company, which has a seasonal demand, okay? That means that the demand for goods and services are seasonal. Another example of a company that has a seasonal demand will be a company that produces raincoats, okay? That will also have a seasonal demand also. Or what again do you think would be another example of a company that has a seasonal demand?
Farmers, farmers too.
Farmers, perfectly, especially in our side of the country where we don't have availability of irrigational facilities. They have to depend heavily on rainfall. So you can also talk about farmers. They also have a seasonal demand. So that means during the dry season, most of them have to look for other things to do. When the rain starts to fall, they come back to their farms again. Okay, so in this case, we are saying that AMA has an umbrella production company. Okay, during the rainy season, the demand for umbrellas is 2,000 per week. Okay, but during the dry season, people still need umbrella, but they only need them for the sun. And how many people do you even see carrying umbrella when the sun is scorching? Very few. So during the dry season, the demand is just 20 umbrellas per week. What do you think will happen to Ame's company? Let me make this an open question. What do you think will happen during the rainy season? And what do you think will happen during the dry season as well? This is an open question. Please, we cannot contribute, please. And please, okay. So Joshua.
I said the question again.
Okay, please, do anybody wants to tell us what you think would happen to Ame's company? We said Ame has a firm or a company that produces umbrella. In the rainy season, Ame's company has a demand of 200 per week. Okay, but in the dry season, she only has a demand of 20 per week. This is typically seasonal, right? Has a seasonal demand. What do you think will happen to her employers during the rainy season and the dry season? Okay, so Kayum. Yes, please.
I think the employ like people will lose their jobs in the dry season because plenty people will not demand for the umbrella, so they will need a little like employees to produce the umbrellas. But in the rainy season, he will need more employees to produce the umbrella. So that.
Okay. So thank you very much then. No, that's 100% correct. So you are saying that In the rainy season, the demand skyrockets, or the demand is very high as compared to the dry season, where demand is very, very low. So what this means is that, as our brother Mr. Kayum explained, during the dry season, the demand is only 20. Look, if the company is even to retain its workers, it's not that it is Ama who is wicked. If Ama, who is the owner of the company, decides to retain the workers, which, let's say, there are 50 workers, okay, producing 50 MLS in a week, she will even get money, enough profits to pay those workers, okay? That means there will be a scenario where workers will be working and their salaries will not be paid, and it will lead to a whole lot of things. And genuinely, she has to lay them up. They have to go home because, one, their services are not needed anymore. She can only now keep 10 based on the income they receive, okay, and based on the number of output that they have to produce. Their services are not needed anymore. She does not have money to also fund all those number of workers. So during the dry season, all the majority of the workers will have to be laid off. And during the rainy season, she has to employ again, or she has to recruit again, because the demand goes up and she will need more people. Seasonal unemployment. It happens as a result of seasonal tendencies or changes in seasons, which causes a fall and rising in demand. Okay, so that means that at a certain season, workers has to be laid off. At a certain season, more will be employed. So farmers do the same thing. Okay, so basically, if we have a farm that if you go to our villages, okay, where our grandmothers and our grandfathers, our uncles, our aunties, and some of our relatives are, who are typically farmers by nature. Most of them, during the dry season, they have to go home. They cannot farm. Okay, they have to wait for the next rainy season before they can farm. So during the dry season, they are seasonally unemployed. Okay, so we can say those people are seasonally unemployed because they cannot work as at that point in time. But when the season changes and the rain starts, they go back to their farms again. Okay, so such people are said to be seasonally unemployed. When they are unemployed as a result of an economic recession like COVID, we say they are cyclically unemployed. When they are unemployed as a result of their skills not matching the market demands, we say they are structurally unemployed. When they are unemployment as a result of their day shifting from one work to another, we say they are frictionally, do we say frictionally unemployed? Okay, so frictional unemployment. So please, are we all cool with this? All right, so that leads us to an end of this session. I wanted to take session 5 because we've already opened unemployment. So I just wanted to go and then conclude or complete unemployment so that we just have to like zoom into that straight away and then we complete that. But I think with our time there, which is 9:50, we just have 10 minutes left. But regardless, could we open the session with our 10 minutes? We'll still certainly be able to do something. Okay, so I'll stop sharing and share again. Okay, so please, I guess we cannot see my screen, right? Okay, so let's continue. So session 5 talks about unemployment. Okay, so we've already laid the foundation to unemployment and we can already build on that. So under this, we'll look at the definition of unemployment. We'll look at the computation of the unemployment rate. Okay, so I hope that we'll be able to at least look at start the computation, and then in the next session we would ask and continue from there. Okay, and then even how do you call it? Solve some questions under that. Okay. So that's what I intend to do, that whenever we look at anything, we try to solve some questions and that is especially for the data response. So unemployment. So I've already explained what unemployment is, right? So I'm coming. Is an explanation already here, right? So we said unemployment is typically the scenario where people are willing, okay, people of the labor force are willing and able to work, and in fact they are searching for jobs, okay, but the system cannot provide them jobs. So they are willing and they are capable of working, but the system cannot provide them jobs. So we call those set of people as unemployed. So full employment of workers in a country is critical to achieving higher levels of GDP than will be possible with idle workers, okay, which is idle labor force. So initially, I was trying to tell you that, I was trying to say that there is a relationship between the GDP of a nation and its labor force, okay. Yeah. So wages adjust so that the demand for labor is equal to the supply of labor. Okay, so this is the equilibrium scenario um, for unemployment. Okay, so we are saying that if we can create a scenario, okay, where the demand for labor meets the supply of labor, so let's call this um, demand, and let's call this no, let's call this wage. Okay, so we call this wages, and then we call this demand. Okay, so we have no, I'm coming. So let's call this wages and let's call this where's my eraser? Okay. So I believe our wages are supposed to come to here rather. Okay. So the wages and then the number of people employed. So basically we are saying that we have to create an equilibrium scenario, okay, where our demand for labor intersects the supply of labor, okay, and at that point in time, an equilibrium is formed. And what this equilibrium means here is that all workers will be fully employed. Everyone will be employed. And let me explain the reason why. Please, does someone want to ask a question? Okay. So the reason why everybody will be employed as at that point in time is that demand for labor, okay, let's say if employers in a country are demanding 500 workers, the supply of labor is also 500, right? Which is the demand for labor is 500, the supply for labor is also 500. So as at that point in time, unemployment will typically be zero. Okay, nobody in that economy will be said to be unemployed. I'm sorry. So everybody in that economy will be said to be employed. Okay. So, however, there is always unemployment in even when an economy is doing well, I stated this thing earlier that there is nothing like zero unemployment. Okay, this thing only exists in theory. Okay, for steady purposes, it only exists for that purpose. But in a practical sense, there is no scenario where the demand for labor will be equal to the supply for labor. Okay, that condition is not realistic in a practical sense. So, however, there is always unemployment even when an economy is doing well. The unemployment rate is never zero. It fluctuates around the natural rate. So the natural rate has to do with the average, okay, for that particular economy. So unemployment, a number of questions arises. How does government measure the economy's rate of unemployment? So the government has to have a means of measuring unemployment, and what problems arises in interpreting the unemployment data, and how long are unemployment typically, how long are the unemployed typically without work? So we want to know how we can calculate unemployment. We want to know how we can interpret the unemployment data. And we want to also know how long the people have been unemployed. So these are some of the key things that the sessions would tackle. Okay. So and I would end our session here because I believe our time is up. And then tomorrow we are going to complete this session and open another session. I mean, we will not open another session, we'll complete this session and solve questions, okay, past questions under unemployment. Okay, so please let's get ourselves set for tomorrow. Okay, so we'll complete session 5 and then we solve questions under that. And you can see that 2 sessions has been dusted. Next week we'll complete 2 sessions. We have 4 sessions going. And then the last week we are going to complete an additional 5 sections, and each sections we will complete solve questions, complete solve questions, complete solve past questions, so that by the time our economics paper is up, we would be very, very fit and set for the paper. So please, any question? Please, any question? All right, so if you don't have any question at this point in time, then I think we can bring our class to a close. Yeah. Okay. All right, so we'll meet again tomorrow, same time. We'll have a good night, please.